With New Orleans Saints training camp right around the corner, there are several position groups that we're excited to see, but one has a tall task in order to answer the seemingly insurmountable questions around it. I'll tell you which unit that is, as well as all the position groups that we're excited to see. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over on USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline. They've got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. Go and check them out, BetOnline, where the game starts. On today's episode, we're breaking down the position groups across the New Orleans Saints roster that we're most excited to see in training camp. Some we're excited to see because they have big question marks. Others we're excited to see because we just want to see if they're going to live up to the hype. I want to start off with a unit that kind of rocks the line or walks the line in between of both here, because you can kind of lump two position groups into the idea of pass catcher or receivers, one of which we're very excited to see, the Saints wide receivers. The other has a ton of questions to answer, and it's going to be a bit of a tall task for them to do so, and that's the tight end group. Let's start with the excitement, though, because the New Orleans Saints have put in a lot of work sort of vamping their wide receiver room, and they've done so in such a way that should make them a very good passing team, maybe one of the top passing offenses in the NFL. After coming off of a year in 2021 where you didn't have an 800-plus yard receiver, you had several receivers that walked into starting roles that didn't necessarily expect to be there at the beginning of the season. Michael Thomas was never able to get healthy and out on the field. The Saints had little to no luck at all, I guess you could say no luck at all, adding to the wide receiver room either during or before the season. Remember their feverish pursuit of Odell Beckham Jr. at one point, but now this New Orleans Saints wide receiver room is entirely different. Just looking at the three starters that are going to see the field most, guys like Michael Thomas, now rookie Chris Olave, as well as Jarvis Landry, two out of the three of which were just in Miami working with Jameis Winston and another group of receivers that included guys like Lucas Krull, Adam Troutman, Juan Johnson was there, Andy Dalton and Ian Book was there. It was really cool kind of leadership or expression of leadership by Jameis Winston to see everybody together like that. But a lot of these guys at that wide receiver position already getting work in with their quarterback that's going to be throwing them the ball in 2022. And that's important at this point in the offseason. Remember, over the course of the past couple of off seasons, we haven't seen offseason team activities at all. 2 years ago, because of the effectively Sean Payton just saying, hey, look, there's too much going on in the world right now. There's too many questions. Go away, go home. I'll see you at training camp. Last year, the NFL and NFLPA couldn't agree upon their, health and safety protocols. And so teams effectively protested and saying, we're sitting out of all OTAs. We'll see y'all at training camp. Now you're seeing a lot of work getting done between guys like Jameis and this receiver room. The question in the receiver room is going to be, who are the guys behind the big three? Deontay Hardy, Marquez Callaway, they seem to be most primed and in line. But if the Saints do decide to keep a sixth receiver, guys like Traquan Smith, Dejon Dixon, Kirk Merritt, and others will get opportunities at that spot. So the wide receiver room is definitely one that we're excited to see. But we're excited to see that because we know that that's going to be a very, very fun group to watch. The big question mark when it comes to the receivers in general, right, all the pass catchers on the team, is going to be tight end. Right now, that New Orleans Saints tight end includes guys that were on the roster last year, like Juan Johnson, Adam Troutman, Nick Van Ette, and then, of course, Taysom Hill, who's shifting positions. But you do have a couple of extra guys, J.P. Holtz, who's a little bit more of an H-back, and then, of course, undrafted free agent Lucas Krull, who the Saints brought in right after the draft. They've also made a couple of other moves. They had Kahale Waring for a little while, then they didn't. They brought in another tight end. So, there are some other guys that are going to get some opportunities there. But the biggest question mark is, who's even going to be tight end one by the time of the season begins? I mean, you would imagine that it's going to be Adam Troutman. You certainly cross your fingers that in his third year, he steps into that role. But as we've discussed in the past, The New Orleans Saints tight ends last year didn't produce a single pass catcher with 300 or more yards. Adam Trautman got close, but he missed some games with injury. Second behind him, though, was Juan Johnson. Now, I don't know if you've seen the photos of Juan Johnson here recently, but he's bulked up, added quite a bit of muscle. If he's able to put on a little bit more of a display and show that he's grown as a run blocker, could he potentially challenge Adam Trautman at that tight end one spot? And throughout all of this, we are also curious about how Taysom Hill factors into the tight end room, the H-back system, the working in the backfield, and how often are we going to see him under center? There are still so many questions around this tight end room, and it's going to be a tall task to answer all of them by the end of training camp. The biggest question, too, would be one of the other biggest questions, I guess I'll say, around that position woght be, are they going to bring in anybody new? Are they going to get a look at somebody else that's out there? The Kyle Rudolphs of the world, some of these other free agent tight ends that are out there. Cam Jordan on Twitter the other day trying to recruit Eric Ebron, saying, hey, Eric Ebron's available, tagging the Saints in that tweet. So there's definitely some, I guess, maybe let's say exterior/internal interest, or maybe let's say it this way. There might be some internal interest on looking outside of the room to see if there's anybody else that they can bring in to add to it to help push some competition. And that's what Dennis Allen's entire offseason has really been about so far. I mean, the idea of continuity and cohesion early, then he got into, really addressing all of the skill positions, really addressing all of the premier positions like wide receiver, tackle, cornerback, all that. But after that, or in addition to all of that, he really focused on competition. Where can he raise the stakes? Where can he drive some competition to either help guys that are already in the room get better or find guys that are better than the ones that are already in the room? Hard to believe that they won't do that at a position that has so many question marks like tight end. So while wide receiver is a spot that we're very, very excited to see kind of get rejuvenated over the course of camp and see how these guys perform. Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave is sure to be a big play factory all throughout training camp, make a lot of plays. I think Dejon Dixon will as well. And then you're going to see Michael Thomas as he comes along. Again, I expect it to be a little bit of a ramp up going into training camp as opposed to just immediately being available to go. Although he could surprise all of us, just like Jameis surprised all of us one day with like, hey, look, no brace. But we're going to see some exciting stuff from the wide receivers. Tight ends, we're just looking to see if they're going to be able to answer some of the biggest questions amongst any position group on the team. Now, one position group, or one, I guess I'll call it full defensive unit, really, that we have very few question marks about outside of, can they live up to the hype? It's the New Orleans Saints secondary. Can they exceed expectations? Can they meet expectations with all of the additions, changes, and of course, big names that have been added to that unit? We'll break down the secondary as we continue on with the position groups that we're most excited to see at New Orleans Saints training camp, just about a week away and only one day away. Rookies reporting tomorrow. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. First, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, your number one source for all your sports wagering information, all your sports wagering needs. So if you're wanting to be able to keep up with all of the trends in action, BetOnline is absolutely the place for you to check out. Right now, you can bet on things like Saints win total in 2022. Do you think they're going to win more than 8.5 games, less than 8.5 games? That's stuff that you can get in on. Where do you think they're going to finish in the division right now? They're favored for the second spot in the NFC South. You think maybe they can upset the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? You can go and check that out as well. There's so much that you can take advantage of with BetOnline and your New Orleans Saints well before the season even begins, and it gets all the more fun once the season does get started in just a couple of months now. So you'll want to make sure that you're keeping it locked over on BetOnline so you can make sure you're getting in on all the odds, lines, and props. They've got more than ever before. Once again, that's BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Which NFL stars move betting lines the most? Beginning today, July 18th, happy birthday, mama. Locked On is going to give you the 50 most valuable players from the NFL odds makers themselves over at BetOnline. So available today over on the Locked On NFL podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and on YouTube as well. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're rolling through the position groups that we're most excited to see with training camp just a week and a day away, basically. I'll be reporting for training camp myself on the 27th. Next Tuesday, you're going to get a few two-a-days, things like that here on the channel. We're gonna have a lot of fun all throughout camp, but we're already having fun kind of previewing it, looking at what we're excited about. We broke down the wide receivers, and one of the things that makes the wide receivers in particular so fun to watch is who they're going to be going up against. this New Orleans Saints secondary is the best unit, that best position group on the team. There are just so few question marks with this group on paper. The big thing is going to be now, can it live up to the hype? The New Orleans Saints secondary will include players like Marshon Lattimore on one side, Paulson Adebo or Alontae Taylor or Bradley Roby on the other side, CJ Gardner-Johnson in the slot, who's become one of the most feared nickel corners in the NFL, and then new additions, Marcus Maye, who's basically going to be playing your deep safety role. He came over from the New York Jets this offseason, and then Tyrann Mathieu, who's going to be playing your versatile strong safety role for the most part, who came over, of course, most recently from the Kansas City Chiefs, but most importantly, New Orleans native himself, just like Jarvis Landry. So there's a lot of hype around this unit, right? This secondary, the corners and safeties combined. And I think that some of that hype comes from seeing what the New Orleans Saints were able to build despite what they lost. Losing both safeties over the course of this offseason, Marcus Williams, who took a big contract with the Baltimore Ravens, and then Malcolm Jenkins, who retired this offseason, to be able to walk out of that pairing of safeties and into a pairing of Marcus Maye and Tyrann Mathieu, with some pretty good depth at safety as well, with the addition of Justin Evans and with the return of PJ Williams. The Saints are in a really, really good spot, and there's a reason for the excitement, because you sort of expected this unit to take a step back, but because of their attention to it and their continued work with Tyrann Mathieu, their quick work with Marcus Maye, who, if you, I've mentioned this a few times, but if you look since 2017, Marcus Williams was number 2 in the NFL in forced incompletion percentage. Number 1 on that list was Marcus Maye. So a very good replacement in terms of ball skills and ability to impact the receiver at the catch point, but can also play in the box, can also rush the passer, can also be a defender in the run game. He has a little bit more versatility. Same thing with Tyrann Mathieu, who has a ton of versatility, but a little bit more youth and speed and agility than maybe what Malcolm Jenkins had left at the end of his career, who was still playing some of the best football of his life. So you walked away from a pairing that was very defined, Marcus Williams and Malcolm Jenkins. You knew what their roles were. Now, with Marcus Maye and Tyrann Mathieu, you have a lot more versatility, a lot more ability to shake up, disguise, change things, show one thing pre-snap, do something different post-snap, all of that. So it'll be really exciting to see how Dennis Allen, as well as Ryan Nielsen and Chris Richard, the Saints co-defensive coordinators, utilize the versatility of these players. They'll also have that versatility with CJ Gardner-Johnson and maybe get him involved in some extra spaces as well. But we're also going to be watching, a cornerback. We're going to be watching a position battle at corner opposite Marshon Lattimore. It's going to be Paulson Adebo, who I think it's his job to lose, right? He played so extremely well last year in his rookie season, had 3 interceptions, 66 tackles as well, showed that he can defend in the run game. He does all the things that the Saints really, really like. So I think that it's his job to lose. But they did go out and draft Alontae Taylor out of Tennessee in the second round and have expressed their intent that he will compete at that spot opposite Marshon. So you're going to see a position battle going on over on that side. And both of those guys, Paulson Adebo as well as Alontae Taylor, high confidence players, high maturity players, high IQ players. So it's going to be a very fun cornerback battle or position battle to watch over the course of training camp. And listen, the Saints hype doesn't just come from what they've done so far this offseason. You look at the last 2 years, a team that has had 18 interceptions on the defensive side in each of the last 2 years, that ranked 6th in the NFL last year, 1st in the NFL in 2020. They've been a top 5 scoring defense in the past 2 seasons. And the secondary has been a huge part of that. Guys like Marcus Williams, Malcolm Jenkins, and Marshon Lattimore have been a part of these units, even back to Janoris Jenkins that was there. And you even look at the impact that this team has had on a drive-by-drive basis as opposed to just like a statistically broken down play-by-play basis like interceptions. They have forced the top 5 or bottom 5, I guess, for the opposing offenses time of possession per drive at only 2 minutes and 35 seconds. That's the average amount of time that an opposing offense possessed the ball against the Saints defense last year. An average of only 5.7 plays. That was another top 5 ranking for that Saints defense. A top 3 ranking for them in terms of yards allowed per drive, 27.8 yards allowed per drive. That's pretty incredible. Only 1.63 points allowed per drive as well. Again, this was a top 5 scoring defense, number 4 in the NFL when it comes to points allowed. They were number 3 in the NFL when it came to points allowed per drive. So you see the efficiency rankings are absolutely there, and they're so remarkably consistent. And part of that consistency has been their ability to be productive at the third level. CJ Gardner-Johnson was on Good Morning Football the other day talking about how they have talent at level 1, level 2, level 3. They're not just going to waste it. It starts with them, right? And that relationship, of course, between them and the defensive line. Defensive line is going to be a lot of fun to watch as well. I don't want to go without mentioning them, but this secondary has so much hype around it. And they also have a fantastic unit of wide receivers to line up against now. They're going to be pushing each other to the limit. Iron sharpens iron, as Chris Richard likes to say. And that's going to be happening all throughout New Orleans Saints training camp. So while the secondary looks to live up to its expectations, one unit, the offensive line, is going to be looking to exceed them. Rough year for the New Orleans Saints offensive line last year. Injuries, also some production issues that came up all throughout. Can they rebound in 2022? It all starts in training camp, and we'll break that down coming up next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And let me tell y'all, hindsight is 2020. You can't change what's happened in the past, but maybe you can get a little bit of help for yourself in the future. Help out future you a little bit. Don't you love when early you or past you does future you some favors? Isn't that always great when future you becomes present you? You get it. Now you can do that, maybe even help yourself out with a little bit of cash. All you have to do is check out Dave. Dave is the online banking app that can help you walk away with up to $500 instantly with their program Extra Cash. That's more money to fill your tank. That's more money for a wedding gift with that wedding that's coming up. It is wedding season after all. Or of course, if you just want to catch up on some bills, they can help you out with all of that as well. There's no interest, no credit check needed, none of that. Millions of people have already downloaded and are using the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with Extra Cash. So download the Dave app today over in your app store. Go and check it out right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an Extra Cash account and you can walk away with up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go ahead and visit dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees do apply. Banking is provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Go and check them out because future you will thank you. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with the final unit, final position group that I'm most excited to see going into training camp. And then a lot of us are just looking to see if they're going to be able to answer the questions here on this unit. And it is the offensive line. The New Orleans Saints will only go so far in 2022 as the offensive line will help to carry them. And that work begins in training camp. And in fact, some of that work has already begun. You see the changeover at offensive line coach with the reunion of Doug Marrone with the New Orleans Saints. He was offensive coordinator back like 2006 through 2008. But now he's coming back as an offensive line coach, and he's a fantastic developer at the position. Notice that a lot of the spots that we're talking about here today all have some changes in their coaching staff one way or another. For wide receivers, they got Cody Burns there instead of legendary coach CJ, who's been the wide receiver coach there for a very long time. But now Cody Burns is there, formerly of the Tennessee Volunteers as well as the Auburn Tigers. They bring in, a couple of big-time offensive assistants as well. The secondary sees a little bit of a shift just because Chris Richard adds co-defensive coordinator to his focus. And on the offensive line, you see the big change with offensive line coach Doug Marrone. Doug Marrone is a fantastic developer, and his assistant offensive line coach, Zach Strief, has been developed in the system before. So both of them have very, very valuable jobs stepping into 2022 to help this New Orleans Saints offensive line rebound from where it was last year. Now, there are a couple of things that led to where they were last year. It wasn't just about performance. It wasn't just about production. Obviously, they had a ton of injuries starting from early on in the season. We saw Tyrann Armstead miss 4 games early. We saw Eric McCoy miss a few games early, and then Cesar Ruiz having to bump over to center, and then a guy like James Hurst coming in to plug in at right guard. There was so much shuffling going on. Eventually, they lost Andres Pete for the season. Eventually, they lost Ryan Ramczyk for the majority of the remainder of the season. Eventually, they would get Eric McCoy back, and then they would get Tyrann Armstead back, but then we would lose Tyrann Armstead. So it was a lot of shuffling, a lot of having to make up for this player not being available, that player not being available. The only New Orleans Saints offensive lineman to appear in every game last year was Cesar Ruiz, and he had to do it at 2 different positions and was still a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of the development that you would hope that he would have at that right guard spot. So he's going to be a big focal point over the course of this offseason and over the course of training camp for Doug Marrone. For Zach Strief, another big focus for him is going to be Trevor Penning, the New Orleans Saints' second of their 2 first-round selections in this year's draft. The offensive tackle coming out of Northern Iowa, who is expected to, or at least the hope is, that he'll be able to be the longtime starter at left tackle in place of Tyrann Armstead, who's now a Miami Dolphin. So you can see where the question marks are here, right? Can they rebound from a questionable 2021? Can they figure out what's going on with Cesar Ruiz and how to help him take some steps forward and help him develop, how to help the game click for him? And then with Trevor Penning, how quickly can you get him out on the field? Now, the good news at left tackle is the Saints feel good with what they have, whether it be Trevor Penning, who steps up and becomes a starter right away, or whether they go to James Hurst, which is not a bad situation for them at all. They like James Hurst. They saw him at the position already last year. There's no issue if the Saints have to go to James Hurst for a few games or even for the entire 2022 season, although your best case scenario is for Trevor Penning to win that spot so that James Hurst can compete elsewhere. Now, this New Orleans Saints offensive line doesn't allow a lot of sacks. But when we look back at the past few years, since about 2017, and even before, honestly, the New Orleans Saints defensive line has consistently been one of the best, offensive line has consistently been one of the best lines in the NFL. That was not the case last year. And yes, again, injuries played a role in that, but they still have to bounce back to the mentality that they had 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, to retain their sort of crown as one of the top offensive lines in the NFL. And they have some major question marks, one on the interior and one on the blind side of the quarterback that they'll need to get figured out. Question marks aren't a bad thing. They can get these figured out, but it's part of all what makes the offensive line such an exciting position to watch throughout training camp. Because again, this New Orleans Saints team only goes as far as the offensive line can take it. And they'll need to be looking at who's going to be the sixth offensive lineman, who's going to be the extra guy coming in, who's going to be, the top reserves. They're going to need to be ready there too. One of the other big improvements that the Saints made over the course of this offseason was bringing in Maye to come in and be their director of sports science. They created the position for him, hired him from Alabama from the same title, had him come in and do that. When Alabama and the Crimson Tide bought into his practices, they reduced soft tissue injuries by 50% immediately the next year. So the New Orleans Saints, who had to start 58 different starters in 2021 because of a litany of injuries, would love to see those injuries come down by 50% or even more, if we're being honest. And so how does that impact the offensive line as well? In either case, the Saints are going to need to be ready just in case there are any injuries at that position. So they're not only going to be looking at these starters, they're going to be paying a lot of attention to the depth back there as well. Guys like Calvin Throckmorton, James Hurst, if he's not a starter, and other players that are coming in that have a lot of versatility are going to be, Landon Young, for instance, who can play either tackle spot. They're going to be of utmost value. Forrest Lamp, who can play all along the interior, utmost value. So those are going to be some of the names and some of the players that are going to be getting really, really close looks all throughout training camp. All right, y'all. So those are the three position groups, or let's just say units, I guess, that I am most excited to see going into training camp next week. Coming up tomorrow, one of my favorite things about being able to work and talk to New Orleans Saints fans is that Saints fans really, really care about the roster. They're true football fans. Who's the second, tight end? Who's the fourth tight end? Who's the second fullback they're going to bring in? So let's highlight some of the maybe not so nationally recognized topics, but the ones that you should care about locally that aren't getting a lot of play, including some conversation in the quarterback room that's becoming really, really important. So we're going to break all of that down in tomorrow's episode. We've also got some guests coming up throughout this week. Lots of great stuff coming up for you. You know how I am with guests. I never tell you until it's all completely wrapped up and in the books, but I'm about to do that interview here in a little bit, so I should be able to share who that interview or who those interviews are with on Tuesday's episode. So we'll break all of that coming up tomorrow. I appreciate you as always for coming through for another episode of Locked On Saints and making me your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, for your second listen, go and check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Everything you need around the league in less than 30 minutes, but you can also check out the top 50 most valuable players according to who moves the betting lines the most over on the same channel. I appreciate you as always, making me a part of your day. If you see me, say hi. I'll see y'all tomorrow. But for everything you need in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.